Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Senator Bob Day, a very favourite guest of ours on this show, jeremycordeaux.com. Are you there, Senator?
Bonjour, Jeremy.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Comment ça va? Yes.
Oh, très bien, merci.
That's all I know.
Look, before, can I just say that I attest to what Ian Plimer says about going to Texas. They hear your accent and it's free beers. But not only that, when I went to Texas a few years ago, and they take you out, take you to a bar, and the first thing they do in these bars, they frisk you to see if you've got any guns.
Oh, God.
And if you haven't got one,
they'll give you one.
Give you one.
Well,
but Houston is they have no planning laws, no town planning laws, urban. It's like Australia was before town planning took off here in the 1980s. I mean, prior to the 1980s, we had suburbs like Colonel Light Gardens and Prospect and Glen Osmond and some of these beautiful suburbs, all done without any town planning laws.
Yeah.
And now, once the town planners took over, we've now got sardine suburbs where they squeeze in cheek by jowl all these. But anyway, don't get me started. But I just thought that was an interesting observation of Ian's about Texas.
I wonder if anyone has ever done a study on the fact that people are not good when they're all packed in together. People need space. People must need space.
They did. I've seen studies where, in fact, they talk about people who live on the fringes of the suburbs. And this is the pre-80s suburbs. Were not people who live on the fringe of society. They even smoke less. They get better TV reception. They even smoke less, and their quality of life is better because they've got a bit of space around them.
Yeah. Somebody, and I don't think it was a lab test or anything, but it was suggested that if you had that cities or living in the suburbs or wherever was a little bit like this experiment, that you have a shoebox and you have, 3 rats that you put in the shoebox. They'll end up being good friends or making love, and get on famously. But you put in the same space 10 or 20, they will kill each other.
They kill each other.
They will kill each other.
People do need space. And look, I also agree with Phil Speakman. Speakman Stillwell was the name
That's
of
the
his
name.
film.
I couldn't think of it. Yeah.
I remember Phil. I knew Phil quite well back in the day. And I remember a very significant event back in December 94. And if Phil's listening, he'll remember this. We went to a dinner at the Hilton in Victoria Square, and Phil Speakman and Colin McLeod and myself and we went with John Howard and Peter Costello. And John Howard was in a very, very good mood because he'd just done a deal with Peter Costello. This is when Alexander Downer was leader of the opposition and wasn't travelling too well. For John Howard to take over the leadership. And then after a couple of terms for Peter Costello to then succeed him. But of course, John Howard took over, but the deal with Peter Costello kind of fell apart a little bit. But we tried to recruit Phil Speakman into politics at that event, saying, Phil, you've got to. We need you. We're always looking for good people in politics, but no, he was committed to business in South Australia, and he was right that back in the Playford day, cheap land and cheap power and cheap water and lower wages, but a higher standard and a higher quality of life in South Australia. That was the big attraction. Come to Adelaide.
Yes.
You can own your own home. You'll have a better standard of living, a better quality of life, but the wages might be lower than Sydney. But so what? It's what your dollars can buy that counts.
Yeah, it didn't matter. The money was it went further.
And this is, I mean, that can be done again. And this is why I was a bit disappointed with that David Spears kind of has resigned. And there again, I was a bit disappointed that, I've had a gutful. I'm being attacked all the time. I remember, you'll like this, Jeremy, Oscar Wilde quote. He used to say, in fact, the thing they said about Oscar Wilde, and again, it reminds me of you, they said Oscar Wilde, he had a prodigious memory and a beautiful voice. And, what a combination. So there you go. There's a compliment to you, Jeremy. Prodigious memory and a beautiful, but Oscar Wilde used to say, praise makes me humble, but when I'm abused, I touch the stars. Yes. And it's one of those, politics is one of those games where when you're being attacked, when you're being undermined, you know that you're getting under their skin, you know you're making a difference. And if you're not being attacked, and if you're not having rocks from being abused, then you're not doing your job properly. So it's the sort of temperament. Some people have it. Some people don't like being abused and attacked, and that's obviously perfectly understandable. But in politics, you have to do it. Like Oscar Wilde once said, when they said, "But Oscar, the public will be annoyed with this." And he says, yes, I know. The public likes to be annoyed.
Gives us something to do.
Absolutely. So there you go. There's just a couple of little observations about we'll see how Vincent Tarsi needs to, the media will build him up because that creates news. Yeah. And then they'll try and bring him down again because that creates more news. But hopefully he'll be resilient enough to welcome the slings and arrows and attacks and thinks, beauty, I'm getting under their skin, I must be doing something right.
Well, you need a thick hide too. You can't take things too personally, I wouldn't imagine. But if you have that scrutiny that the media will give people in public life, no privacy, there's nowhere to hide. They will keep looking and keep digging till they find something.
Well, our old hero, our old hero John Howard would be a good role model for Vincent to observe about, what you can do and how you can keep persevering in spite of and of all the attacks and so on. But look, I was also interested in your discussion with Ian Parmenter about the refugees, the Palestinian refugees.
What an interesting man. Yeah. Fascinating
indeed. I'm not sure I agree with him on everything, but it reminded me of that book by William Jacob. Do you remember that book called The Monkey's Paw?
No.
Do you remember that story? Fascinating. There was an Indian soldier, this is written 100 years ago, an Indian soldier had brought back this mummified monkey's paw from India and had given it to one of his friends in the UK, in Britain. And he said, this paw, if you hold it, it grants you 3 wishes. But the catch is that you'll be granted your wish, but it will come with terrible and tragic consequences. Mm. And anyway, the person that the soldier gave it to, a guy called Mr. White, he couldn't resist the temptation, and he thought, I'll wish for £200 to pay off my mortgage. So he holds the monkey's paw and wishes for £200, and then there's a knock on the door. And there were 2 men standing at the door, and they were from his son's firm where his son worked at a factory. And he said, we've got some terrible news to bring to you. Your son has just been killed in an industrial accident. We're really sorry. It wasn't the company's fault, but as a measure of goodwill, we want to give you some cash in order to help you through this difficult time. And here's £200. Mm. So he got his wish, but through now the reason I mention this is I noticed that the Greens have done some kind of alliance with these Palestinian Hamas. They're all wearing green now. I call it the new Green Alliance, because they've got their Hamas green headbands and flags and all that sort of stuff.
Oh,
and be careful what you wish for. You sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. And bringing Palestinian refugees. I mean, there are 20-odd other Arab countries who have the same culture, the same language, the same history, all within the same region, and yet none of them, not one of those 21 or 22 Arab countries, will take any of the Palestinians. So you've got to ask, what do they know about Palestinians that Anthony Albanese doesn't?
Yes, very good point.
I remember they say, oh, well, we've had successful migration over the last 50, 60, 70. That's true. But, we had the Italians and the Yugoslavs, and I worked in the building industry, as you know, and I remember the Italian concreters and the Yugoslav carpenters and the Greeks.
Yeah.
They were great in the building, and then the Vietnamese came along and they found a niche in the market gardening, and they were very, very prosperous, and they fitted in doing market gardening. And then a lot of Africans came, and they get into aged care. Now every nursing homes and now are staffed by a lot of Africans.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the Palestinian, the Muslim Islamists, some of those kind, they don't seem to find a niche. They haven't assimilated into the economy in ways that these other waves of migrants did. So we need to be very, very careful about all this.
Can't we make assimilation a condition of residency, perhaps, or?
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
I've got the feeling that we don't explain to people when they arrive just exactly what we expect. All we expect is to go on with our Australian way of life. And please come in and share our Australian way of life, but don't rearrange the furniture.
Well, for more than 100 years, we've had the most successful immigration program in the world, and everyone goes on about we're the most successful multicultural. That's because there was a very, very strict vetting process that people coming to Australia were vetted to make sure that they did subscribe to. I mean, Ian Palmerton mentions about the Ukrainians coming and the Vietnamese, but they had very similar cultures. The Ukrainian had, Orthodox kind of Christians, and the Vietnamese were a lot of them Catholic and so on. Mm-hmm. So they had very, very similar outlook. But the Sharia Islamist kind of culture is one that they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in equal rights for women. They don't believe in equal rights for, same-sex people and all these sorts of things. Yeah. Now, a simple vetting process would tell you. I mean, it started with Al Grasby, back in the 70s or 80s when they changed the rules for vetting migrants. But prior to that, we had a most harmonious multicultural society because they were very careful about the types of people that came in and to make sure that they would. I mean, you don't take away the Vietnamese or the Yugoslav or Greeks. I mean, my kids all played a lot of soccer against a lot of the clubs.
Yeah.
That used to be Juventus and, against the Polonia and all these. Now, they got them to change the names of the clubs away from ethnic kind of names, but still the culture of the clubs was still very, very strong. And one of my close friends was Polish, and he barracked for Polonia. And these are all great people. They're just wonderful people, but they all assimilated into the Australian way of life, and yet were able to balance retaining their cultural heritage, but at the same time fitting in with everyone else.
Yeah, the Hungarians were wonderful at that too.
Oh, Hungarian! I love the Hungarians. You can't tell the Hungarians what to do. They'll
no.
They're Magyar. The Magyar always used to collect stamps. And the Magyars were wonderful. Hubenoj and I used to play a bit of basketball, I remember.
And so successful. I mean,
very,
Frank
very
Lowy would have to have been the most successful, one of the most successful businessmen in the entire country.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Let me ask you about this. I refuse to do a welcome to country at my Christian conferences.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm being taken to the Human Rights Commission. Dave Pellow is being prosecuted for refusing to include the ritual at services. A conservative Christian minister claims that he is being persecuted for refusing to include a welcome to country ceremony at the start of his religious conferences, and that he is prepared to go to jail to defend his right. I'm terrified that in this country we've got public servants, I assume, manning the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, and God knows what all that costs. But we surely have an inalienable right. I mean, when I hear this welcome to country nonsense, I either leave or turn my back. And now this tells me loud and clear that there are people who would prosecute you for your right. Your human right to say, I don't agree with that.
Absolutely. It's always been, that's as un-Australian as you can get. I mean, religious freedom, freedom of thought. This is positively Orwellian, the thought police.
Yes.
That you're not entitled. It's the 1984 was supposed to be. We should tell these politicians and public servants, look, the book 1984 was a novel. It was not a manual about how to reconstruct society.
Yeah.
I think they've got the wrong end of the stick. I think they think it's an instruction manual.
No, I think that is absolutely right.
Good on David Pellow. I absolutely support him 100%. And look, if he gets prosecuted over that, I mean, there've been few examples, but we need to get behind him and support him, because once you lose your freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom to believe what you believe, you've got nothing left.
Mm-hmm. He says here, you can't mix Christianity, a true religion, with something that has been made up. And he's perfectly right. The Nimbin, whatever it was a music hippie thing in 1972, and Ernie Dingo at that Nimbin
yes.
love-in.
He made it up.
He made it up, and it was a joke. It was part of his stand-up comedy routine. And here are these people who have embraced it with the kind of respect that you'd give something that was centuries old. In fact, I've heard the Prime Minister describe the welcome to country and the smoking ceremony, an acknowledgement of previous owners.
But of course, there's certainly no unanimity of agreement amongst Aboriginals themselves about this welcome to country. You get people like Jacinta Price and others, Warren Mundine, very prominent and successful and eminent Aboriginal Australians. They won't have a bar of it. They've had a gutful of it as well. So it's not as if it's some kind of racist racism. It's freedom of thought. And if Dave Pellow or anybody doesn't want to, acknowledge something that they don't believe in, then they should not be forced to.
Senator, what do we do about the NAPLAN results, which are pretty disgraceful? Or maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know.
Well, it's like most things. It's benchmarking. You sort of think, okay, which schools are doing it right? Which ones are doing it wrong? Let's get an example. All right. Overall, it's disastrous. The average is dropping with the dumbing down of society, of education, as Ian Plimer says. But then you look at and think, okay, the first question whenever you get a problem in a whole group is benchmark it and say, okay, are there any schools that are doing well with NAPLAN? Are there any schools, which ones are doing worse? And then there's a pattern forms. And all of a sudden that private schools or schools that have got probably the Catholic school system or work out which ones and think, okay, why are these schools doing well? And there's an interesting statistic that when I was in the Senate, we did some numbers, and with the amount of money it costs to run the public school system, you could send every child to St. Peter's College on full fees and save money. So therefore you say, okay, why not let's at least start to fix this problem. Let's give an option that it costs about $20,000 a year to send a child to a public school. If you divide the number of public school students by the budget, it costs about $20,000 per student. Private schools, it's only $10,000. So it's half the cost. So they're saying, okay, we're going to give every parent a $10,000 voucher and say, look, it's up to you. You can keep sending your child to a public school if you wish. But looking at these NAPLAN tests, it's clear to us that the public schools are doing far, far worse than the private ones. So here's $10,000 if you would like to go and enroll your child in a private school somewhere. Now, that would be a good start, because at least then some parents would start sending their children to schools where their education results are better.
Yeah.
And you take a practical approach, and you're not ideological. You're not saying, oh, well, we don't like this type of school or that one. It's the parents who have the most vested interest in seeing better results for their children. So therefore, let's get back to the parents. And now you can imagine the public school system would go absolutely ballistic if you tried to give parents a choice about where they would send their children, because they'd all, their whole existence is. I mean, the Department of Education in Canberra is massive, and yet they don't run a single school. They don't hire any teachers.
Yeah.
But it costs. They've got massive buildings in Canberra. We could abolish the federal government, the Commonwealth Department of Education, and just put it all back to the states.
Yeah.
And then all that money that goes into the education from the Commonwealth taxation pool, give it to parents and say, look, here you go. I'm sure you're as disturbed and as troubled about your child's education results as we are. We've noticed that private schools are doing a lot better. Here's $10,000. Go and find yourself a private school.
Yeah. God, I wish you ran the country, sir. I do. But the thing about it is sounding out the words, the phonics, the old-fashioned system.
Yes, yes.
A is for apple.
Yeah.
It worked. Now, these people come in and they do the whole word recognition thing, and it doesn't work, but they never come back and say, oh, well, we're very sorry. We got it wrong. We apologize.
No, it does. The reason it doesn't work is we haven't put enough money into it. So they want more. They double down. They would never, ever. And what I noticed it from when I was in politics and Parliament was that they never, ever admit that they were wrong. Their first response is, well, we haven't funded it enough. We need to pour more money into it. They'll never say, look, this is patently not working.
Yep, wrong track.
They'll never do. My wife was a school teacher, primary school teacher, and the old phonetics was the way to do it. And they've never had any problems with NAPLAN tests back then. They're all the students glowing results.
And the business of here's the spelling list for today. I remember, and I was not very good at school, but I remember taking.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
The spelling list home, and my grandmother would... I probably wouldn't be able to read or write except for my grandmother, come to think of it. She just took the time to sit down with me and go over everything and over and over and over everything, and it sort of sticks. But the idea is that if I didn't go back the next day and be able to spell all the words on that list, I would get the cane. And I didn't want to get the cane.
No, yeah.
So I came back with the words all remembered or spelt.
That's right. Nothing like some punishment for focusing the mind on getting it right.
God, and again, that's another thing that worked. But you can't. I don't know what teachers use for discipline these days because they don't have any tools, any weapons of mass destruction or mass education. I don't know where it's all going to go. I really don't. I just know that it's not working.
But over-regulation, it's taken out of the hands of the people who have the least interest in making it work. Put it back to the ones who have the most to gain by the benefits, and that's the parents and the students themselves. And it's just exactly the same. Yeah.
Senator, I was just going to say, are you following any of this CFMEU stuff where they're actually sitting around in Canberra debating as to wwhether or not this should be done to clean up the CFMEU or that should be done to clean up What's the argument?
Well, they're all sitting around, of course, working not what to do with the CFMEU, but how to put a spin on it. There's absolutely no way that they're going to do anything substantial about it. The whole thing's just laughable. What they're sitting around, they're all friends. The minister, the government, the unions, they're all absolutely lock solid because the union movement owns the Labor Party. So there's this idea of that, we're thinking about putting the CFMEU into administration. All that. I mean, this is just absolute joke.
And the minister, what they're trying, the minister was the attack dog for the CFMEU going back a couple of years.
Yeah, of course. And so what they're trying to do is how can we put a gloss on this and how can we make this to look like we're doing something when they're all absolutely in the thick of it themselves. They drive up costs because the Labor Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of the union movement. So, it's laughable.
Maybe they think we haven't. Maybe they think we haven't noticed.
Oh, well, what they know is that they can get away with it because they get away with it. They've been getting away with it. They're there to maintain their role, and they don't want to change that.
I think we learned nothing from that waterside dispute with Patrick's, going back to the scandalous behaviour of the.
Well, that's right. Back in the waterfront dispute with Peter Reith and John Howard and so on. Yeah. They tried, and everything was against them. They had the courts against them. They had the whole public sector against them. They were all against them. It's a bit like the old painters and dockers. They had a royal commission into that. I remember that time there was a murder. The infamous. A guy was murdered. He was shot with a 12-gauge shotgun while standing in a line of 50 other waterside workers, and no one saw or heard anything.
No, of course not. No, and I could not believe when they talked about these, what do they call them, ghost pay packets. And the Patricks had to pay the union the salary for people who didn't even exist. And this was money that just got handed by Patrick's to the union so that the union wouldn't walk off the job.
Yeah, well, it's exactly the same. It's the same in the building industry. They invent jobs like these lollipop people that are on $150,000 a year. They're constantly bringing in these rules and regulations. It's supposed to be a closed shop. Or, supposed to be no such thing as no ticket, no start. But that's all just, No,
I know. It's awful. Senator.
Well, the other thing too is the new building code changes, the 7-star energy ratings, and they're going to add more cost to building a house. I remember arguing with public servants saying, well, look, you keep bringing these 5-star energy ratings, and what's more important, a hot house or no house at all?
Yeah.
And they said, well, well, that it all depends. And I said, yeah, that's because you already own a house. But for a young first home buyer trying to get into the market, every time you put up the price of a house by $1,000, you knock another 10 people out of the market. So you're going to add $15,000 for a 7-star energy rating.
Yeah.
And you're going to add another $5,000 for what they call livable housing, disability access. This is on every house.
Yeah, I know.
Now,
I know. It's unbelievable. And then the next thing is that they are going to insist, I think it's by 2030, they're going to insist that everyone has a smart electricity meter.
Yes.
Which puts us in the deep end of a terrible situation. Do I have the right to say, no, I don't want a smart meter?
Well, at the moment you do, but pretty soon you won't. They'll just pass a regulation that forces you to do it, and then they'll be able to turn your power on and off from with a computer from their head office.
Yeah.
So you won't have someone having to come up to your driveway and turn your meter off.
And they can charge me. They can charge me
Yep.
At whatever time of day is going to make them the most money.
Absolutely, they will. And they will do that. And you look at all these changes, they start making changes, and each house, it's, another $20,000 increase, 10,000 homes a year. So there's $200 million a year costing the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you only needed 1,000 homes a year sort of retrofitted or upgraded to disability access or something like that, you could do it for a tenth the price.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
With good intentions. No truer word was ever spoken.
I want you and Tom Playford back. Please.
We'll
quickly,
do our best.
Urgently. Take care of yourself, Senator.
You too, Jeremy.
Good to talk to you.
Passe on bon weekend. Have a good weekend, folks.
Yep, have a wonderful weekend.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.